Hello, and welcome to this short webinar from Move Consulting as part of our series on coaching. This webinar is about coaching skills for managers and leaders. What are they, and how can you use them in your day-to-day work? I'm Dominique, and I'm going to be taking you through this topic today. Thank you for joining me. This is the second in our initial series of 3 webinars. The first session was about defining coaching and how it differs from mentoring, sponsorship, and management. This session will dive into that final question. The third session later this week will cover this same issue in more depth with academic supervision of graduate students and postdocs in mind. So let's begin. This is the key question that hopefully you're all interested in answering. Perhaps you've been asked by a team member to do some coaching, or advised by a boss or a colleague that coaching can bring another level to your management and leadership. They're right, but there are some challenges to doing it effectively, and that's what we're hopefully going to help you navigate today. We'll put up our contact information at the end of this deck. Remember that you can always get in touch for advice and guidance, whether it's about bringing more in-depth training to your organisation about how coaching can improve effectiveness, might be organising a problem-solving coaching session for you or your team, or even arranging an exploratory one-to-one coaching session for yourself. This will be a short webinar, so we're not going to be able to cover everything about coaching, management and leadership in one go. Instead, we've got some key learning points for the session. First, what is coaching? Quick reminder in case you haven't seen the first webinar or haven't seen it recently, we'll cover this. Then, what is the end goal of coaching in a management and leadership context? And finally, we're going to talk about some techniques and methods for making coaching work in that context. In particular, we're going to first quickly cover Nancy Kline's concept of a thinking environment. That's to help you understand the sort of meeting atmosphere you'll be trying to create for coaching, which will almost certainly be different from your usual one-to-one meeting atmosphere. And then to help you structure your career coaching conversations, we're going to talk through the very popular GROW method. If you're interested in learning more about techniques and methods for coaching in your management or leadership context, we'd really encourage you to contact us for a free exploratory discussion about training. First then, our definition of coaching. And this is not the only definition of coaching, but we think it's useful for setting out some of the key components you might want to think about in bringing coaching alongside some of your other supportive relationships, whether you're a mentor, a sponsor, or just a line manager of somebody who could benefit from coaching. So coaching is a method for achieving set goals through reflection and dialogue with support and guidance from an impartial coach. This webinar is going to talk in more detail about methods and goals, but one thing that we need to think about first is this final bullet point, from an impartial coach. Ideally in coaching, the coachee can rely on their coach to offer support and guidance impartially without their own interests or prejudices coming into play. So, for example, a coach might also be a mindfulness teacher, but wouldn't propose mindfulness as a possible solution for issues their coachee is facing without there being some objective reason for suggesting it. As managers and leaders, we're not particularly impartial about our staff day to day. We want them to do well in the roles they have so that the organisation can flourish. Perhaps our own objectives or even financial incentives are aligned with them doing certain things in a certain way, and our job is to make that happen. So, can we be an impartial coach? This webinar is about how we think you can take yourself out of the room for a second and focus impartially on the team member in front of you, their interests, their goals, their passions, even when those might diverge from yours. Coaching is ultimately about helping people to learn, not about teaching them to adopt a predefined solution. So I used this metaphor in last week's webinar. Coaching is teaching someone to fish so they can eat for a lifetime. But it's also important what their motivation is. Maybe this cat wants to fish, maybe actually he prefers mice. We need to find out. And that key distinction between what you want and what they want, we distinguished in the last webinar as coaching for compliance from actual coaching with compassion. Coaching for compliance might well be part of your managerial work. So someone needs to meet the job standards set for them to progress or to stay in their role. Particularly with a new starter or someone taking on more responsibility, you have to train them to be more effective. But that's not what we're talking about when we're talking here about coaching. We're talking instead about coaching with compassion, beginning not with a problem to be fixed, like performance, but linking to the person's positive view of themselves and the inspiring dreams or goals that they hold. So if you're reviewing these slides afterwards, there's a link here to Richard Biotis' page on the Institute of Coaching website, where you can see his books and read some resources for him and learn more about coaching for compliance and coaching with compassion. But this brings us to our second learning point then. What is your end goal as the manager or leader stepping into the role of coach? As a coaching manager or leader, you're thinking in the mode of a guide. You're looking to help your team members, and yes, you're looking to enhance their experience of working in their current role and team. But you're also helping them to look forward to set and achieve new goals that might be completely outside that role and team, and that might even be different to or run contrary to your own goals and objectives. So here are two key things you need to do with a coaching hat on. Find out what their goals are and find out how you can help them achieve them. The only way to really do that is by asking. So coaching as a method starts with questions. One of the most important techniques for coaching is asking questions and being genuinely interested in the answers that emerge. So far, so simple, right? But this is where plan meets reality, and every human interaction can be complicated. You want to ask questions in the right way, in a relationship of trust, and at a moment when the person you're talking to has got the emotional and mental space and capacity to answer you properly and really engage. So that's where our third key learning point about techniques and methods comes in. Asking a quick question at the end of a one-to-one where it's clear you want to get to your next meeting is not going to elicit the right response. It will not be coaching. Coaching your team members won't have to always be a formal process, although it might sometimes be. But you can bring some particular tactics, methods, techniques, however you want to think of them, bringing them intentionally to your everyday conversations to create the right atmosphere and help them do the thinking that makes coaching truly productive. So the first question you have to ask and answer for yourself is, what is the environment or atmosphere where you're going to have these conversations? We don't all have full control over the environment where our one-to-ones take place. Maybe they have to be via video conference, as is common right now, or maybe they're always in one particular cramped meeting room. We're not talking about finding the perfect environment. You don't have to wait for that. Instead, we're talking about creating the right interpersonal environment. Many of our one-to-ones take place in what I call an operational environment. That's the first column on the left. These might be short meetings, scheduled back to back to download information about, say, how a project is going or what tasks need to be completed next week. They're often focused on decisions. Your employee might bring escalated issues to the meeting and want you to take a view on how they proceed. These are not environments where great coaching can happen. Instead, coaching is most likely to happen successfully in something like what Nancy Kline calls a thinking environment. We'll run through the 10 features that Kline sets out for these environments, but just from this list here on the right, you can see the comparison. These meetings are slower paced. There are pauses for deep thinking work to happen, not quick decision making, and they'll demand your full attention. So let's talk about Nancy Kline's idea of a thinking environment then. If you're looking for more, you can go to the Time to Think website based on Kline's research and methodologies, and you can look at her books, Time to Think and More Time to Think. The key thing for us in this webinar is that there are lots of models out there about how to improve your conversations and your team communications. And these can all be brought into coaching to help you create the right environment for coaching conversations. Coaching sessions are times when someone is thinking about themselves, the choices open to them and their decisions past and present. You can see why a thinking environment might be a good choice. We're going to loosely group Kline's 10 components of a thinking environment, mostly to help us think about how to implement them. So here are a few about how you should expect to talk to a coachee in a coaching style discussion. Key is actually first how you listen. Are you showing respect and interest in what they're telling you? What is your body language saying to encourage them to keep sharing, especially if you're not used to having bigger picture conversations that go beyond day-to-day work and performance? How can you bring attention to that conversation? The next 2 points here, incisive questions and appreciation, can be taken together in thinking about how to talk in a coaching session. You need to ask what Kline calls incisive questions, questions that can challenge assumptions and help open up new thoughts and possibilities. But you need to do so with an attitude of respect, not criticism or aggressive challenge. These conversations are not an interrogation or an interview, and your questions shouldn't be interruptions, which is where the next point comes in. In these conversations, you need to create ease. That requires you both to get comfortable with silences. With your coaching hat on, you need to take the lead in encouraging silence, and you should use it to your advantage. If you're paying attention to what someone is saying to you, you're not planning what to say next. You'll need to take a moment after they've stopped to formulate your next incisive question. Do that. And taking a pause will also help you to remember that you should be questioning, probing, exploring, not throwing out solutions, which we'll talk about again in a moment. Finally, on this slide, place. As far as this is in your control, try to talk in an environment that is conducive to long and reflective conversation. Don't make them perch on the edge of a table while you sit behind a desk, for instance, or sit at the head of a meeting table while they sit halfway down one side. If at all possible, find ways to show in the physical environment that you're engaging as equals in this conversation. That's got a lot to take in, so let's just take a quick example about how this might look in practice, in particular paying attention, using ease to your advantage, and asking incisive questions. Let's say you're in a discussion with the staff member you're coaching, and they seem to be expressing frustration at the nature and the volume of their work. There is a moment of pause for you here. If you're hearing this assumption in what someone is saying, your instinct as a manager may be to switch to solutionizing. You need to come to me and I can help keep people off your back. Or you might be inclined towards a defensive posture. Look, this is a busy team. ... Stop. That's not what this conversation is for. Maybe you'll have to have those conversations, but for now you need to be in the thinking environment with your coachee. So what's happening here? You just think you're hearing this assumption, but it's not being stated explicitly, perhaps precisely because they're afraid of getting told you'll fix it for them or that you'll interpret it as a sign of weakness. You should ask, I think I'm hearing you say you're feeling powerless to change the tasks and asks of this job. Am I getting that right? See where that leads you. If that is indeed the assumption they're making, then there are alternative ways of looking at the problem that you can help them explore. It's unlikely they have no freedom at all to make improvements. So here's an incisive question you could ask. If you had a free choice, how would you restructure your time? Now, implicitly, that question is asking how they could restructure their time to do the role better and enjoy it more. But leave that bit out, because doing the role better and enjoying it more, i.e. staying in it, is probably your goal with your manager's hat on. And here we want to see what comes out from their perspective. So with your incisive questions, sometimes less is more. Going back to Klein's 10 components then, this is a loose grouping of 3 more that relate to what you talk about in these sessions. There'll be encouragement from you, of course. Being impartial and focusing on asking questions doesn't mean you shouldn't be positive and encouraging about their competencies, their abilities to make the changes they want to make. You should be careful not to make this about being the best, quote unquote, the best salesperson, the best PA, etc. Conversations should focus on defining and achieving good, whatever that looks like to them. So that's what we mean by going beyond competition. You'll also be talking about feelings in a way that might be unusual for your workplace. This is why having the right environment is so important. Sometimes we might get so frustrated by a problem or a challenge that we lose the ability to think clearly about it. When we're trying desperately not to show our frustration, that's doubly true. So coaching conversations should help air some of those emotional responses so we can clear them away and think better. And these conversations are also places for sharing information so that everybody has a full and accurate picture of reality. Think back to that example and the assumption about being powerless to change what work comes across your desk. That assumption is probably based on a faulty information picture, one that excludes the levers that people actually have to make those changes. Try to talk about the facts of the situation as objectively as possible, sharing information that somebody else might not have or might have forgotten, and do that without value judgments about them or others. That leads to the final 2 components of Klein's 10. These are often more relevant for thinking about or thinking in group settings, but they're still relevant in one-to-one discussions. First, equality. We've talked about being in a place that treats you both as peers for the thinking conversation and about treating each other with respect. So, keeping agreements and boundaries, like if someone's indicated they don't want to talk about a specific issue. In groups, this might also encompass making sure that everyone has equal opportunity or time to talk. But in a one-to-one coaching context, you don't want to be talking 50% of the time. You're listening with your coaching hat on. And finally, diversity or difference. There will be differences of opinions. And when you're sharing information to create a full and accurate picture of reality, you also need to bear this in mind. Everyone's reality may feel different. The same event might mean something different to different people, and that information is valuable too. So that's our environment, and Klein's 10 components can help us keep the right atmosphere and mindset in coaching conversations. But how do you actually organize that conversation? That's where this second technique or method comes in. Grow is a very popular and well-known approach, so you can find lots of resources that go into more detail about how to implement it, or you can contact us to talk about hands-on training using this approach. This is just a quick overview to help you frame your thinking. Grow focuses on goal setting and problem solving, so it may not be right for absolutely every conversation, but it will help you keep most conversations on track. You can be upfront about using it, telling the person you're talking to that you'd like to try to structure the conversation this way. Particularly as you start introducing coaching with team members, it can be helpful to have some shared parameters like this to build trust, demonstrate your care and compassion, how much thought you've put into the conversations you'll be having, and avoid them feeling surprised about what might feel like a sudden turn in the discussion as you move from one to the other. So Grow itself has 4, occasionally 5 components, and we've set out the 5 here, but obstacles almost always emerge as part of the conversation about the reality of the situation the person is describing to you. Let's take an example then. You ask about the goal of the coaching conversation or set of conversations you're going to have, and this is the answer you get. I want to have more freedom to change the tasks and asks of this job. This is a temptation as a coaching manager, right? My team members asking me for something. What can I do for them? But again, think back to what coaching is and Klein's thinking environment and stop. This is about them finding solutions for themselves. So have them describe the reality of the situation. What are the tasks and asks? How many of them are core to the role? How many of them are additional? You may learn things here about how work has slowly shifted around your team, perhaps for good reasons, perhaps for bad. Try not to get bogged down in the information that you learn here. There'll probably be unliked and unloved tasks described. Getting rid of some of those might turn out to be a conversation for the options stage, but remember also we're trying to uncover what the obstacles are to the goal of freedom to shape the job, not the goal of having a perfect job. Keep that goal in mind. You could be sidetracked into talking about person X not being willing to take task Y, and again the temptation will be to solutionize as a manager. So maybe you write this goal down and you stay focused on helping them understand the obstacles they're experiencing and to start building some options for how to tackle them. Developing a good range of options depends on uncovering the real obstacles. Options might be things they can do for themselves, and ideally they will be. They could, for example, start to say no to a colleague who has been sending too much their way. They could start reprioritizing certain work, allowing it to be good enough rather than just perfect. Might be that some of the options they identify are asking you to intervene or to change things. This is not the moment to have the conversation about making that happen. Instead, the way forward, where ideally all of your coaching conversations end, the way forward that they define might be to have a separate conversation with you about the options they've identified and what they want to happen. Try to keep meetings with your coaching hat and meetings with your manager hat separate if you can. So that's our short guide on coaching skills for managers and leaders then. First, create a thinking environment. This might guide your wider teamwork, but you can do it just for one-to-ones to help set the right tone. Use a model if it will help structure your conversation and help you keep that right tone of discussion. And then, of course, get feedback to help you refine your approach and persist. If you'd like to find out more about how to use coaching in your management and leadership, talk to us about more in-depth training on techniques and methods for doing so, or even arrange some coaching for you and your team, this is how you can contact us. We're looking forward to working with you.